Amina adjusted the strap of her gold heels, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Weddings were not her favorite events, but when Funmi, her best friend, begged her to be her +1, she couldn't refuse. The reception hall in Lekki was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Guests moved between tables, their outfits bright and elegant, their faces glowing with joy. "See, Amina, this is why I love weddings," Funmi whispered, nudging her. "You never know who you'll meet." Amina rolled her eyes but smiled. She knew Funmi meant well. At 26, Amina was used to the subtle hints from family and friends about settling down. Her mother would sigh every time a wedding invitation arrived at their Surulair home. "This could be your turn, Amina," her mother would say, adjusting her Iro and Buba as they prepared for yet another event. But Amina wasn't in a rush. She was busy running her small but growing fashion business, designing bespoke dresses for Lagos's working women. Love, she believed, would come when the time was right. As the night wore on, Amina excused herself to get some fresh air. The hall was getting stuffy, and she needed a break from Funmi's endless matchmaking attempts. Stepping onto the balcony, she let the cool evening breeze brush against her skin. "That party in there is serious," a deep voice said behind her. Startled, she turned to see a tall man with a disarming smile. He was dressed in a sharp navy agbada, and his cologne carried a subtle, expensive scent. "Tell me about it," Amina replied, managing a smile. "I'm Habeeb," he said, extending a hand. "Amina." They talked for what felt like minutes, but was closer to an hour. Habeeb told her he was an entrepreneur in the tech industry. He had just launched a startup developing apps for small businesses. He was confident, funny, and full of ideas, the kind of man who could light up a room without trying too hard. Amina found herself laughing more than she had in months. "Can I have your number?" Habeeb asked as the sound of drums signaled the bride and groom's entrance back into the hall. For the first time in years, Amina hesitated, but only for a second. Their first official date was at a rooftop restaurant. Amina learned more about Habeeb. He spoke passionately about his work, his dreams, and his plans for the future. He wanted to expand his business across Africa, empowering small businesses with affordable tech solutions. "I like a man with ambition," Amina said, sipping her Chapman. "And I like a woman who knows what she wants," Habeeb replied, his eyes twinkling. From that night, they became inseparable. Habeeb made her laugh like no one else. He would surprise her with small gestures, an order of suya after a long day, a bouquet of sunflowers just because, or tickets to a movie she'd mentioned in passing. Amina introduced Habeeb to her mother, who was polite but reserved. "Seems like a nice young man," her mother said after Habeeb left. "But Amina, take your time." "Ah, Mama, why can't you just be happy for me?" Amina replied, though she knew her mother meant well. Even Funmi, who was usually skeptical of Amina's relationships, seemed impressed. "He's handsome, successful, and funny," Funmi said. "But Amina, are you sure he's not too good to be true?" "What's your problem, Funmi? Must every good thing have wahala attached to it?" Amina laughed, brushing off her friend's concerns. Months turned into a year, and Habeeb became a constant presence in Amina's life. He talked about marriage often, painting vivid pictures of the future they could build together. He wanted to buy land in Aja and build a home where they could raise their children. "I can't wait to see you as my wife," he'd say, kissing her hand. Amina's heart swelled at the thought. She could finally see the life her mother always dreamed of for her. But there were moments that made her pause. Sometimes Habeeb would go quiet when his phone rang, stepping away to take calls. Other times he'd cancel plans last minute, saying he had to handle business. Once, during a weekend trip to Epé, she noticed he avoided questions about his family. "Why don't you ever talk about them?" Amina asked one evening. "It's complicated," Habeeb replied, his voice tight. "Let's not spoil the moment." Amina lets it go, but the questions lingered. Despite the small doubts, Amina was happy. She believed love required trust and patience. And after years of putting her dreams on hold for others, she wanted to embrace this one for herself. The first time Amina felt something was off, it was a Friday night. Habeeb had promised to take her to a new restaurant in Lekki that everyone was talking about. She had spent the entire day at her workshop, sewing dresses for a big order, and the thought of unwinding with Habeeb made her giddy. She wore her favorite black dress, simple but elegant, and paired it with gold earrings that her mother had given her for her last birthday. By 8 p.m. she was ready, her makeup flawless and her hair neatly tied into a bun. Habeeb was supposed to pick her up by 7:30. By 8:15 he hadn't arrived. At 8:30 he finally called. "Baby, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice hurried. "Something came up at work. I can't make it tonight." Amina's heart sank. She could hear voices in the background and a faint sound of music. "Are you sure you're at work?" she asked, unable to hide the disappointment in her voice. "Amina, what are you saying?" Habeeb snapped, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard before. "Do you think I'm lying?" "No, it's just," she began, but he cut her off. "We'll talk later," he said, and hung up. She stared at the phone, a mix of confusion and hurt washing over her. This wasn't the first time Habeeb had canceled plans last minute, but tonight felt different. The following week, Habeeb showed up at her workshop with flowers and an apology. "Work has been crazy," he said, pulling her into a hug, "but I promise to make it up to you." She forgave him, of course. How could she not? When Habeeb smiled at her, it was as if the world melted away. But little things started to pile up. One evening, they were watching a movie at her place when Habeeb's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and quickly turned it face down. "Who's that?" Amina asked casually. "Just a colleague," he said, his tone too casual. The phone buzzed again, and this time, Amina caught the name Farida flash on the screen before Habeeb silenced it. "Who is Farida?" she asked, sitting up. Habeeb sighed. "Amina, you don't have to worry about every call I get. It's nothing." She wanted to press further, but something in his tone made her stop. It wasn't just the phone calls. There were also his unexplained trips. Habeeb often mentioned business meetings that took him out of Lagos for a day or two. He would call her at odd hours, sometimes sounding distracted, other times rushing to end the conversation. "You work too much," Amina teased him one evening. "Maybe you should hire more staff to help you out." "It's not that simple," he replied, avoiding her eyes. Her best friend, Funmi, noticed the changes too. "Habeeb is always busy," Funmi said one afternoon when they met for lunch. "Doesn't it bother you?" "He's an entrepreneur," Amina defended. "You know how hard it is to run a business in this country." "True," Funmi admitted, stirring her drink. "But sometimes I wonder if he's hiding something." Amina frowned. "Why would you say that?" "Because I saw him at ShopRite in Ikeja last weekend," Funmi said. "He was with a woman and 2 kids. Amina felt a cold chill run through her. "Are you sure it was him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm sure," Funmi said. "I wanted to greet him, but he looked different, like he didn't want to be seen." Amina shook her head. "Funmi, maybe you were mistaken. Habeeb would have told me if he had family visiting or something." Funmi didn't push further, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The next time Amina saw Habeeb, she decided to bring it up. "Funmi said she saw you at ShopRite last weekend," she began carefully. "Oh," Habeeb said, raising an eyebrow. "Why didn't she come and say hello?" "She said you were with someone," Amina continued, watching his face closely. Habeeb chuckled. "Amina, I wasn't even in Ikeja last weekend. I was at a meeting in Victoria Island. Maybe she saw someone who looks like me." His response was so smooth, so convincing, that Amina felt silly for doubting him. But as the weeks went by, the doubts returned. One Sunday afternoon, Amina's mother called her into the kitchen while they were preparing lunch. "Amina, sit down," her mother said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, Mama?" Amina asked, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "This Habeeb, are you sure about him?" Amina frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've lived long enough to know when someone is hiding something," her mother said. "He's polite, yes, but he dodges questions about his family. That's not normal." "Mama, not everyone likes to talk about their personal life," Amina replied defensively. "But when you're serious about someone, you don't hide such things," her mother said firmly. "Be careful, my daughter. Love is sweet, but it can also blind you." Amina nodded, but deep down, her mother's words struck a chord. A week later, Funmi called Amina in a panic. "Amina, you need to hear this," Funmi said, her voice low. "One of my colleagues knows Habeeb. She said he's married." Amina's heart stopped. "What?" "Yes, she said he has a wife and 2 kids in Ikeja," Funmi said. "I didn't believe her, but after what I saw at ShopRite..." Amina's head spun. She wanted to scream, to deny everything Funmi was saying, but the pieces were starting to fit. Could it really be lying to her? And if he was, why? As Amina sat on her bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she felt a heaviness she couldn't shake. The man she loved, the man she thought she knew, was becoming a stranger before her eyes. That night, she decided to call Habeeb. "Hello, baby," he said when he picked up. His voice was warm as usual, but Amina couldn't help noticing the slight hesitation. "Hi," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "Are you free tomorrow? I thought we could spend the day together." Habeeb paused. "Tomorrow? I have a meeting in the morning, but I'll call you when I'm done." Amina felt a pang of frustration. Meetings, always meetings. "All right," she said softly, not wanting to push further, but this time she decided to do something she had never done before. Follow him. The next morning, Amina borrowed Funmi's car. It was an old Toyota Corolla. She parked outside Habeeb's apartment complex in Yaba, her heart racing as she waited. Around 10 a.m., Habeeb stepped out, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers. He looked handsome, as always, but Amina barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on him as he got into his car and drove off. She followed at a safe distance, careful not to lose him in the chaotic Lagos traffic. After about 30 minutes, Habeeb turned into a quiet residential area in Ikeja. Amina's stomach churned as she saw him park in front of a modest duplex. She watched as he got out of the car and walked to the front door. A woman opened it, holding a toddler on her hip. She smiled warmly at Habeeb, who leaned in to kiss her cheek. A boy, maybe around 6 years old, ran out and hugged Habeeb's legs, shouting, "Daddy!" Amina felt her chest tighten. The world around her seemed to blur as the truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Habeeb had a family, a wife, children. Amina didn't know how long she sat there, gripping the steering wheel, her mind racing. Her first instinct was to storm out of the car and confront him, to demand answers. But as she watched the little boy tug on Habeeb's hand, leading him inside, she felt a wave of sadness drown her anger. How could he do this to her, to them? Eventually, she drove back to her apartment, her hands trembling on the wheel. When she got home, she sank onto the couch, her mind replaying the scene over and over. Her phone buzzed. It was Habeeb. "Hey babe," he said cheerfully. "I'm done with my meeting. Can I come over now?" Amina stared at the phone, her throat tightening. How could he lie so easily? "No," she said finally, her voice cold. "I'm not feeling well. Maybe another time." Habeeb sounded concerned. "Are you okay? Do you need me to bring anything?" "I'm fine," she replied, cutting him off. "I need to rest." As soon as the call ended, Amina burst into tears. The next day she confided in Funmi. "I saw him," she said, her voice shaking, "with his wife and kids." Funmi's eyes widened. "Amina, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to be right about this." "What do I do?" Amina asked, her hands clutching her knees. "Do I confront him? Do I just walk away?" "You need to hear his side," Funmi said gently. "As much as it hurts, you deserve the truth, and he owes you that." That evening, Amina asked Habeeb to meet her at her home. She didn't want the confrontation to happen in a public place so that she could question him without disturbance. When he arrived, she could see the surprise on his face. "You look tense," he said, reaching for her hand. Amina pulled her hand away. "We need to talk." Habeeb frowned. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I know about your family, Habeeb. Your wife, your kids." His face froze. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it. But then he sighed and slumped back in his chair. "How did you find out?" he asked quietly. "I followed you," she admitted. "I saw you with them." Habeeb buried his face in his hands. "Amina, it's not what you think." "Don't," she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. "Don't you dare lie to me again." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, Amina. I really do. But my marriage, it's complicated." "Complicated?" she repeated bitterly. "You have 2 children, Habeeb. That's not complicated. That's a commitment." "I haven't been happy in my marriage for years," he said. "My wife and I, we're like strangers. I never planned to fall in love with you, but I couldn't help it." "Don't insult me," Amina snapped. "You've been lying to me this whole time. You let me fall in love with you while you had a whole family hidden away. How could you do that to me?" Habeeb sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "Amina, it's complicated. My marriage, it's been broken for years. I'm only there for the kids. I swear to you, I love you. You're the one I want to be with." Amina stared at him in disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? You love me, but you didn't think I deserved the truth? You made me a part of your mess without even giving me a choice." "I didn't want to lose you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean everything to me." Amina laughed bitterly. "If I mean so much to you, why did you let this go on for so long? Why didn't you come clean? Or better yet, why didn't you just leave me alone if you weren't free to be with me?" Habeeb reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "I was going to tell you," he said. I didn't know how." "Of course you didn't," Amina shot back, her voice shaking. "Because you wanted to have it all. You wanted to keep me while pretending your wife and kids didn't exist." "It's not like that," he said, his tone desperate now. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," Amina said coldly. "You did." "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be with someone who lies so easily, who breaks promises without thinking about the people they hurt." "Amina, please." "No," she said firmly, standing up. "It's over." As she walked out of the house, leaving Habeeb behind, Amina felt a strange mix of heartbreak and relief. The truth had shattered her, but it had also set her free. 6 months later, Amina sat at her kitchen table, staring at the crumpled piece of paper in her hand. It was a note written in her father's familiar, flowing handwriting. She had found it tucked inside a box of old family photos earlier that morning, a box she hadn't thought to open in years. The words on the page were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her chest feel tight. "Amina, if you ever find this, it means the truth has found its way to you. I never wanted you to carry this burden, but you deserve to know who your siblings are." The note went on to mention a woman, someone Amina didn't recognize by name, but who, according to the letter, was connected to her father's life in ways she had never imagined. Amina read the note again, the words blurring as her mind raced. She had been trying to move on from Habeeb's betrayal, throwing herself into work and spending time with friends who insisted she deserved better. But this note had opened a new wound. What did her father mean by, "The truth has found its way to you"? She decided she couldn't sit with the questions any longer. Her father had passed away years ago, leaving behind a lifetime of untold stories. But Amina's uncle is still alive. He is a father figure for her, and he is the one person who might have answers, even if they weren't the answers she wanted to hear. That evening she made her way to her uncle's home in Surulere. The small bungalow stood exactly as she remembered, its paint peeling in some places. She knocked on the door, and her uncle's voice called out from inside. "Amina, you didn't tell me you were coming," he said with a smile as he opened the door. "I know, Baba," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I needed to talk to you about something important." Her uncle's smile faded slightly. "Is everything okay?" "Not really," she admitted. "Can we sit down?" They moved to the living room, where the worn-out cushions of the sofa felt like home. Amina clutched the note in her hand, unsure of how to start. "Baba," she began slowly, "I found something. A note from my father." Her uncle's eyes narrowed slightly, his face unreadable. "What kind of note?" "He wrote about a woman. Someone I've never heard of before. He said I deserved to know the truth about who my siblings are." Her uncle's expression hardened, and he looked away, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "Baba, please don't lie to me," Amina said, her voice breaking. "If there's something I need to know, just tell me." For a moment, there was only silence. Then her uncle let out a long, weary sigh. "Amina," he said, his voice softer now, "there are some things that are better left in the past." "Maybe for you," she replied, her frustration spilling over. "But I'm the one living with the questions. Please, Baba, I need to know." Her uncle leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the years was pressing down on him all at once. Finally, he spoke. "Your father, he loved you more than anything," he began. "But there were parts of his life that he tried to protect you from. Before he met your mother, he was with another woman. Her name was Hajia Halima." Amina's heart skipped a beat. "Who is she?" "Hajia Halima came from a very wealthy and powerful family," her uncle continued, his voice tinged with bitterness. "A wealthy businesswoman. But their relationship wasn't built on love. It was complicated. He left her when he realized he couldn't live that kind of life anymore. And my siblings? Amina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her uncle hesitated, his eyes filled with a pain she hadn't seen before. Yes, you have 2 older sisters from your father's previous marriage, he said firmly. They are Hajia Halima's children, Farida and Fahima. The words hit Amina like a punch to the stomach. She felt the room spinning, her breath coming in short gasps. We wanted to tell you, her uncle said, his voice breaking. But your father begged us not to. He wanted you to grow up without the shadows of his world hanging over you. Amina sat there, stunned. Her entire identity felt like it had been upended. Do they know about me? She asked finally. I don't think so, her uncle replied. When your father left, he cut all ties with her. He wanted a fresh start. Amina stared at the floor, her mind racing. Habeeb's betrayal had been painful enough, but now this? She felt like she didn't know who she was anymore. That night she lay in bed, unable to sleep. Questions swirled in her mind. What kind of man was her father? Why had her father kept this secret for so long? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do with this information now? The next day, Amina decided she couldn't live with this mess. She had to know more about her father's other family. The Bellos are a very prominent family in Lagos and very much in the public eye. He was a prominent figure in Lagos. They are known for their philanthropy and multiple successful businesses. Amina felt a mixture of curiosity and dread as she scrolled through pictures of them at numerous charity events. Finally, she made a decision. She needed to meet them. Not because she wanted a relationship with them, but because she needed answers. She reached out to an old journalist friend who had connections in high places, asking for help arranging a meeting with the youngest daughter, Fahima. Days later, she found herself sitting in a sleek office in Victoria Island, the hum of air conditioning the only sound as she waited. Her palms were sweaty, her heart pounding. When the door opened and Fahima walked in, Amina's breath caught. She was a very beautiful woman though, a couple of years older than her, but it wasn't noticeable at all. She looked at Amina curiously, as if trying to place her. You must be Amina, she said, his voice soft but steady. I was told you wanted to see me. Amina stood, her legs trembling. Yes, she said. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. She gestured for her to sit, taking a seat across from her. What can I do for you? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. I believe you're my sister. For a moment her expression didn't change. Then, slowly, she leaned back in his chair, her eyes narrowing as she studied Amina's face. How did you know this? And how sure are you? She asked quietly. I am very sure, Amina replied, her voice shaking. Amina clasped her hands tightly on her lap, her heart racing as Fahima's sharp gaze pierced through her. She felt small under the weight of the moment, but knew she couldn't falter now. I found a note, Amina began. Her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. It was from my father. Our father. He mentioned you and Farida. He said I deserved to know the truth. For a moment, Fahima's expression was unreadable. Then, she leaned forward, her fingers drumming lightly on the polished desk. The truth? She repeated, her tone calm but guarded. What exactly did he say? Amina swallowed hard, recounting the words from her father's note. She tried to keep her voice steady, but each word felt heavier than the last. When she finished, Fahima sat back, her brow furrowing. I knew he had remarried, Fahima said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. But he never spoke about you or your mother. Not once. Amina's chest tightened. The reality of being an untold part of her father's life stung deeply. I didn't know about you either, she admitted. Not until a few days ago. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken words and emotions neither of them knew how to express. Fahima broke it first, her voice softer now. Why did you come to me? She asked. What are you hoping to find? Amina hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I'm not here to disrupt your life, she said, her voice trembling. I just needed to know, to see you, to understand the parts of my father's life he kept hidden. Fahima's expression softened, and she sighed, a mixture of frustration and sadness etched on her face. It's a lot to take in, she said honestly. You show up out of nowhere, saying we're sisters. It feels unreal. I know, Amina replied quickly. I didn't mean to drop this on you like this, but I didn't know any other way. Fahima studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. All right, she said, her tone decisive. Let's start with the basics. Tell me about yourself. Amina blinked, surprised by the shift in tone. Oh, I grew up in Yaba, she began nervously. I'm a fashion designer. I love cooking, though I'm terrible at it. She chuckled awkwardly, hoping to lighten the mood. To her relief, Fahima smiled faintly. You sound normal, she said, almost to herself. Not what I expected. What did you expect? Amina asked, genuinely curious. I don't know, Fahima admitted with a shrug. Maybe someone who wanted something from me. People often do. I don't want anything, Amina said firmly. I just want to understand. Fahima nodded again, her gaze softening further. All right, Amina, let's try to figure this out together. Several weeks later, Amina and Fahima met several times, each conversation peeling back layers of the mystery that was their father's life. They shared stories, compared childhood memories, and slowly began to see pieces of themselves in each other. Fahima eventually introduced Amina to Farida, who was more skeptical at first. But after a DNA test confirmed their connection, even Farida warmed up to the idea of a new sister. Amina and Farida had been growing closer since they learned they were sisters. One sunny afternoon, Farida decided to invite Amina over for lunch. They sat in Farida's cozy living room, sipping fresh orange juice and chatting about their lives. So what does your husband do? Amina asked casually, curious about her sister's family life. Farida smiled warmly. Habeeb works in tech. He's been growing his business for years. It's been tough, but he's very ambitious. You'd love him. He has this way of lighting up a room. Amina's glass froze halfway to her lips. Habeeb? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Farida nodded. Yes, Habeeb Bakare. Why? Do you know him? The air seemed to thicken around Amina. Her heart raced as she tried to process the words. Habeeb Bakare. Her Habeeb. The man who had told her he was trapped in a loveless marriage, who had filled her world with fake dreams and promises. I think I've met him before, Amina stammered, her voice trembling. Farida, noticing her sister's pale face, frowned. Amina, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Amina forced a smile, though her hands were trembling. I'm fine. Maybe I'm just tired. Farida nodded, though concern lingered in her eyes. You sure? You can tell me if something's wrong. But Amina couldn't. Not yet. She needed time to think. That night, Amina sat on her bed, staring at her phone. Her chest felt heavy, her mind clouded with disbelief and anger. She replayed every moment with Habeeb, every word he had spoken, every promise he had made. It had all been a lie. Then, she realized that the woman she saw with Habeeb several months ago was her sister. The betrayal felt deeper now. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her sister, her family. Amina couldn't keep the truth from Farida. She invited her over, her heart pounding as she prepared for the most difficult conversation of her life. Farida arrived, her usual warm smile fading as she saw Amina's tear-streaked face. Amina, what's wrong? Amina took a deep breath. Farida, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Habeeb. Farida's face darkened. What about him? Amina's voice cracked as she spoke. He and we were together. I didn't know he was married. I didn't know he was your husband. I broke up with him immediately when I found out. Farida's face turned pale, her hand flying to her mouth. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. Amina, please tell me this is some kind of joke. It's not, Amina said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Farida stood, her eyes filled with anger and betrayal. How could he do this to me, to you, to us? Amina reached out, but Farida stepped back, her body shaking. I need to go, she said, her voice breaking. I need time to process this. In the weeks that followed, the sisters barely spoke. Amina gave Farida space, respecting her need to heal. Habeeb tried to reach out to both of them, but his calls went unanswered. Farida eventually filed for divorce, her trust in Habeeb shattered beyond repair. Slowly, the sisters began to rebuild their relationship. They leaned on each other, finding strength in their shared pain and mutual understanding. One evening, as they sat together on Amina's balcony, Farida reached for her sister's hand. We'll get through this, she said softly. Together. Amina nodded, a small smile breaking through her sadness. Together. Though the scars remained, the bond between them grew stronger, proving that even in the face of betrayal, family could find its way back to each other. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends. comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Goodbye.